It was supposed to be just another quiet evening in a small town where nothing much ever happened. People locked their doors, settled in for the night, and trusted that the officers patrolling their streets would keep them safe. Among those officers was James Carter, a well-respected cop who had served the community for over a decade. He was known for his calm demeanor, his sharp instincts, and his dedication to the badge. If anyone had asked, they would have said he was the kind of officer people felt comfortable around. But behind that uniform was a man with secrets, dark thoughts that no one would have suspected. In that same town lived Emily Dawson, a bright and independent 18-year-old girl with big dreams and even bigger heart. She had just graduated high school and was preparing for the next chapter of her life. Some said she wanted to move to the city for college. Others claimed she was considering staying close to home. Either way, she was at that exciting age where the world felt full of possibilities. She had her whole life ahead of her, but what she didn't know was that someone had been watching her. James at first noticed Emily when she was still in high school. Maybe it started as a passing glance, nothing out of the ordinary. But over time, those glances lasted a little longer. He would see her walking home, chatting with friends at the diner, or sitting on her front porch scrolling through her phone. At first, he told himself it was harmless. He was just looking out for her, the way any good officer would. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. Their first real interaction happened one evening when Emily was walking home alone from a friend's house. It was getting dark, and the streets were quiet. She was used to walking by herself. This was her town, her neighborhood. But that night, a patrol car slowed down beside her and the window rolled down. "Emily, right?" The voice was friendly, reassuring. She turned to see Officer Carter smiling at her. She recognized him. Of course. Everyone did. "Yeah, that's me," she answered casually. "It's getting late. You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. She shrugged. "I do this all the time. It's safe around here." James tilted his head slightly, his smile still in place. Even safe places have their dangers. "Want to ride home?" She hesitated. There was no real reason to be afraid. He was a cop after all, someone trusted. So she nodded and got into the car. The ride was short, and the conversation was simple. Just small talk about school, summer plans, nothing too deep. When he dropped her off, he told her to be careful and that he'd always be around if she needed anything. From that night on, she started noticing him more. His patrol cars seemed to pass by her street more often. She would see him at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, even outside the school during dismissal. He would always wave, always smile. At first, it felt comforting. She thought he was just looking out for her, making sure she was safe. But soon, it became clear that this wasn't just coincidence. One evening, she was working a late shift at the local diner. She had taken the job to save up for college, and she didn't mind the work. The customers were friendly, and the tips were decent. But as she wiped down the counter near closing time, she saw a familiar face sitting in the corner booth, Officer Carter. He wasn't in uniform, just wearing a simple jacket and jeans. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, and his eyes were on her. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said with a polite smile as she walked over. He chuckled. "Just needed some coffee. Long night ahead." She nodded, not thinking too much of it, and went back to her work. But when she stepped outside after her shift, she saw his car parked across the street. The moment she walked out, the engine started. He wasn't just randomly there. He had been waiting. That was the first time she felt a little uneasy. Days passed, and the encounters kept happening. Sometimes he would pull up next to her when she was walking home and ask if she needed a ride. Other times, she would get a message from an unknown number, just a simple, "Hey, hope you're doing okay." She didn't remember giving him her number. Her friends noticed it too. "He's always around," her best friend Lily whispered one afternoon. "It's kind of weird." Emily laughed it off. "He's just being nice. Maybe he's just protective or something." Lily frowned. "Protective of what? You're not in danger." That conversation stuck with her. It made her start questioning things she had ignored before. The way his gaze lingered just a little too long. The way he always seemed to know where she was. The way his voice softened when he talked to her, like he was speaking to someone special. One night, she got a message that sent a chill through her body. "You looked really pretty today." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It was an unknown number again, but she knew. She just knew. That was when she decided she needed to set some boundaries. The next time she saw him, she kept her responses short. She avoided eye contact. She made excuses to walk in the other direction. She thought that maybe if she pulled away, he would lose interest. But she underestimated just how deep his obsession had grown. James noticed the change immediately. He saw how she was avoiding him, how her smiles weren't as bright, how she walked a little faster when she saw him coming. And he didn't like it. One evening, as she was locking up the diner alone, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, and there he was, standing too close, watching her with an expression she had never seen before. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked, his voice low. She forced a smile, tried to keep things light. "I've just been busy, that's all." He took a step closer. "I thought we had something special. I thought you trusted me." Her breath caught in her throat. Something was very wrong. She mumbled an excuse and quickly walked away. But she could feel his eyes on her, burning into her back. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. This wasn't just friendly concern. This wasn't just a caring officer looking out for her. This was something else. Something dangerous. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she stepped outside, every time she walked home, even when she was sitting in her room with the blinds half open, she felt it. That heavy, unsettling gaze. She kept telling herself it was all in her head, that she was overthinking things. But deep down, she knew better. James Carter wasn't just an officer keeping an eye on her. He was always there. Too often, too close. She started noticing the little things first. How he would pass by her house, even when he wasn't on duty. How his patrol car would slow down near the diner whenever she was working a shift. How she would get those messages. Never anything threatening, just comments that felt too personal. "Saw you at the park today. Looked like you were having fun. That color looks nice on you. Missed you today." She never responded. She didn't know how to. But that didn't stop them from coming. One night, as she was leaving the grocery store, she saw his car parked at the far end of the lot. He wasn't in uniform, and he wasn't inside the store. He was just sitting there, watching. Her stomach twisted, and she pretended not to see him. But as she loaded her groceries into her car, she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. "Emily!" His voice called out softly. She turned, gripping the cart a little tighter. "Officer Carter!" she greeted with a forced smile. "James," he corrected, stepping closer. No need to be so formal. She nodded quickly, glancing around the nearly empty parking lot. What are you doing here?" "Just grabbing a few things." He lied easily. His hands were empty. She shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I should get going." He didn't move right away. He just stood there, his eyes scanning her face, his expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," he finally said. Her heart pounded. "No, I've just been busy." Too busy to even say hi? There was something in his tone that made her skin crawl. She forced a small laugh. "I didn't mean anything by it." For a second, he didn't respond. Then, just like that, his face softened and he smiled. "I get it. Life gets busy. Just don't forget, I'm always here if you need me." She nodded quickly, climbing into her car and locking the doors the second she shut them. As she pulled out a lot, she saw him standing there, watching her leave. The next day, she told Lily about it. "That's not normal, Em," her friend said, eyes wide. "You need to tell someone." "And say what?" "That a cop is being weird." Emily shook her head. "No one's going to believe me." Lily sighed. "Then at least stay away from him. Don't answer his messages. Don't take rides from him. Nothing." Emily agreed. She was already doing that. But ignoring him didn't make him go away. A week later, she came home late from work. Her parents were out of town for the weekend, so the house was dark and quiet when she pulled into the driveway. She let out a breath and reminded herself She was being paranoid. She had locked all the doors. She had checked all the windows before leaving. Everything was fine, or so she thought. As she stepped onto the porch, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Nice place. Must be lonely tonight. She froze. Her hands shook as she read it again. Slowly, she turned, scanning the street. Nothing. No cars, no movement. But the feeling was there, that heavy, suffocating presence. She ran inside, locking the door behind her. Her heart pounded as she peeked through the blinds, searching the darkness. She wanted to call someone, but who? The police? He was the police. That night, she barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like something lurking. And when the sun finally rose, she told herself she was done being scared. She had to do something. She started documenting everything. She took screenshots of messages, wrote down every time she saw him near her house, even recorded voice memos whenever she had a bad encounter. She didn't know who she would show them to yet, but she needed proof. It didn't take long before she got another message. "Why don't you trust me anymore?" She stared at the words, a sick feeling twisting in her stomach. He knew. He could tell she was pulling away, and he didn't like it. Then came the phone calls. At first, it was just a few, always from unknown numbers. She never answered, but the voicemails he left were chilling. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Emily. I just want to talk. We used to talk, remember? Ignoring me isn't going to make me disappear." She blocked every number, but the calls didn't stop. One evening, she was sitting in her car outside her house, gathering the courage to go inside, when her rear-view mirror caught something, a shadow moving near the tree line. Her breath hitched. It was him. She knew it before she could even see his face clearly. He was standing just far enough away to stay hidden, but close enough to watch. Terror shot through her, and she fumbled to start her car again, but her hands were shaking too much. She grabbed her phone instead and called Lily. "Lily, I think he's outside." "What?" "I see him. He's watching." "Call the police." Emily's stomach twisted. "I can't." "Then come to my house. Now." She didn't hesitate. She started her car and backed out so fast her tires screeched. As she sped down the road, she checked her mirror again. He was gone. She spent the night at Lily's, but she knew she couldn't stay there forever. The next morning, she went home, feeling exhausted and on edge. She thought maybe she was safe now, that maybe he had gotten the message. But when she stepped onto her porch, her blood ran cold. There, on the welcome mat, was a single rose. No note, no explanation, just a rose. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but she was frozen. Then her phone buzzed. A new message. "You can't hide from me, Emily." Emily couldn't breathe. The words on the screen blurred as her hands shook, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The message was clear. He wasn't just watching. He wanted her to know. He wanted her to feel trapped. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping the phone. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the quiet sounds of the morning. The world outside looked the same, calm, peaceful, ordinary. But everything had changed. A car drove past. A neighbor watered their lawn. Birds chirped from the trees. It was as if nothing was wrong. But Emily knew the truth. She turned, throwing open the front door and slamming it shut behind her. She locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. Everything. Then she ran to the windows, yanking the curtains closed. She needed to think. She needed to do something. She grabbed her phone again, her fingers hovering over the screen. Call the police? No. James was the police. Tell her parents? No. They were hours away, and she didn't want to scare them. Lily? Maybe. But what could Lily do? Another message came in. "I don't like being ignored." Emily's stomach twisted. She felt sick. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to make it all stop. But she couldn't. Her mind raced. She needed proof. Real proof. Not just messages. Something undeniable. She needed to catch him in the act. She spent the rest of the day setting up old phones around the house, placing them near windows, near the front door, anywhere she thought he might show up. She downloaded a recording app and left it running while she sat in silence, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. By the time night fell, her exhaustion had turned into paranoia. Every creak in the house made her jump. Every shadow felt like it was moving. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, staring at her phone. Then, just after midnight, something happened. A noise outside. Soft, careful. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't move. She just listened. Then, a quiet knock on the window. Not the front door. Not loud or urgent. Just a tap. She squeezed her eyes shut. Maybe if she stayed still, it would go away. Maybe she was imagining it. Another tap. She forced herself to move, inching toward the window with slow, shaking steps. She pulled out her phone, hands sweating as she opened the camera. Carefully, she peeked through the blinds. At first, she didn't see anything. Darkness. The faint glow of the streetlight. The empty sidewalk. Then she saw him. James stood just beyond the window, half hidden in the shadows, his face eerily calm. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't moving. He was just there, watching. Emily's stomach dropped. She hit record. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he took a step forward. "Emily!" he called softly, his voice muffled through the glass. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I know you're in there." She couldn't move, couldn't think. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I just want to talk." Her fingers clenched around her phone. She hit the emergency dial and pressed it to her ear. 911, what's your emergency? She barely found her voice. "There's a man outside my window," she whispered. "He won't leave. Are you somewhere safe?" She swallowed hard. "He's a cop." Silence. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, a little more careful this time. "Are you saying an officer is outside your home?" "Yes." "Do you know him?" Her throat felt tight. "Yes." Another pause. "What's your address?" She hesitated. What if they sent another officer? What if it was someone who knew him? Another knock. Louder this time. "Emily." James called again, his tone slightly more insistent. She blurted out her address. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. James knocked again. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Emily squeezed her eyes shut. "Please hurry," she whispered. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, suddenly, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows. A car screeched to stop outside. James stepped back. Emily barely breathed as she peeked through the blinds again. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car. One of them, Officer Martinez, was someone she recognized. James raised his hands, slightly, like he was calming a situation. "Hey, guys," he said, his voice light. "Everything okay?" Martinez frowned. "We got a call about a disturbance." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Just a misunderstanding. I was just checking on Emily." Emily's heart pounded. "Say something. Now." She took a deep breath and threw the door open. "That's not true," she shouted. "He was watching me. He's been following me for weeks." Both officers turned to her. James let out a small, nervous laugh. "Come on, Emily. You know that's not what this is." But she saw it. The way Martinez's expression shifted. The way the other officer's hand rested near his belt. "Step away from the house," Martinez ordered. James didn't move right away. "Now," Martinez repeated, firmer this time. James hesitated, his jaw clenched. Then finally, he took a slow step back. The officer spoke to him for a moment, voices too quiet for Emily to hear. Then they led him to the car. He didn't fight, didn't argue. But just before they put him inside, he turned his head, locking eyes with her. And he smiled. Not a friendly smile, not an apologetic one. A promise. The door shut. The car pulled away. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her whole body shaking. She had done it. She had finally spoken up, but she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. That smile, that look in his eyes before they took him away. It wasn't relief. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. A promise. She kept reminding herself that he was gone, at least for now, but the fear didn't leave. Every sound outside made her heart jump. Every flash of headlights through her window sent her into a panic. She had locked every door, double-checked every window, but it still didn't feel like enough. Her phone buzzed. She flinched, staring at the screen. A message from Lily. "Are you okay? Did they say what's going to happen to him?" Emily hesitated before replying. "They took him. That's all I know." Lily texted back almost immediately. "You need to get out of there. Stay with me for a few days." Emily wanted to. She wanted to pack a bag and run, to be anywhere but here. But something in her told her that running wouldn't change anything. If James wanted to find her, he would. Instead of responding, she turned on the TV, hoping the noise would make her feel less alone. The local news was on. She wasn't really paying attention until she heard his name. Officer James Carter has been placed on administrative leave following allegations of harassment and misconduct. The police department has not yet released an official statement, but sources say an internal investigation is underway. Emily's stomach tightened. They made it sound so small. Misconduct. Like it was just a minor mistake. Like he hadn't been stalking her. Like he hadn't been standing outside her house in the middle of the night. She turned off the TV and threw her phone onto the couch. No one was going to take this seriously. Maybe they would keep him away for a few days, a week at most. But then what? What happened when they let him go? She had no doubt in her mind he would come back. The next morning, she went to the police station. She didn't want to, but she needed to know what was happening. When she walked inside, the air felt heavy. Officers moved around, busy with their daily routines, but she could feel eyes on her. Whispers. She ignored them and walked up to the front desk. The officer there looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" "I need to talk to someone about James Carter," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. The officer hesitated before nodding. "Wait here." Minutes passed before a man in a suit walked out, not in uniform, probably a detective or someone higher up. He gestured for her to follow him into a small office. "You're Emily Dawson, right?" She nodded. "I'm Detective Reynolds. I understand you had an incident with Officer Carter last night." "More than an incident," she muttered. He sighed, leaning forward. "I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning." She hesitated. She didn't trust them. Not really, but she had come this far. So she told him about the messages, the way he always seemed to be there, the phone calls, the way he stood outside her house. She told him about the fear, the sleepless nights, the moment she finally called for help. Reynolds listened without interrupting. When she was done, he let out a slow breath. "We're investigating," he said carefully. "Investigating what?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "He's a cop. You have my messages, the call logs, everything. What more do you need?" He rubbed his forehead. "It's complicated." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "No, it's not." Reynolds hesitated. "We've placed a restraining order against him. He's not allowed near you." She laughed bitterly. "A piece of paper? That's supposed to stop him?" "It's a start." She shook her head, pushing back the urge to scream. "And what happens when he ignores it?" Reynolds didn't answer right away. "If he violates it, we'll take action." She stood up. "Then I guess I just have to wait for him to do something worse, right?" He looked at her, something like guilt flickering in his eyes. "I promise you we're watching him." That didn't make her feel any better. She walked out of the station feeling just as hopeless as when she walked in. Lily called her as soon as she got home. "What do they say?" "Nothing useful," Emily muttered. "Emily, this isn't okay. You can't just wait for him to come back." She knew Lily was right, but what was she supposed to do? Leave town? Change her name? Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Her breath caught. But it wasn't from James. It was from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust." Her entire body went cold. This wasn't over. Not even close. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the message. "Be careful who you trust." Her pulse pounded in her ears. It wasn't James's number, but she knew it was him, or someone helping him. The thought made her stomach churn. She forced herself to take deep breaths. Panicking wouldn't help. She needed to think. She typed out a response, then stopped. What was she even going to say? Who is this? She already knew. Leave me alone? He wouldn't. Instead, she did the only thing that made sense. She blocked the number. But that didn't stop the fear crawling under her skin. Her phone rang. She jumped, nearly dropping it. Lily. She answered immediately. Hey! You sound weird, Lily said. What happened? Emily hesitated. Then she sighed. I got another message. Lily cursed under her breath. Please tell me it wasn't from him. I don't know, Emily admitted. It was a different number, but it felt like him. Silence. Then what did it say? Be careful who you trust. Lily's breathing went sharp. Emily, that's a threat. Emily nodded, even though Lily couldn't see her. I know. You need to leave. Emily rubbed her forehead. Where am I supposed to go? He's a cop. He can find me anywhere. You can't just sit there and wait for him to show up again, Lily argued. I don't know what to do, Lily. Emily snapped. She immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm just scared. Lily's voice softened. I know. A long pause. Then Lily asked, what if we went to press? Emily frowned. The press? Yeah. If the police aren't taking this seriously, maybe we make them. Go public. Let everyone know what he's doing. Emily hesitated. That could work, but it could also backfire. If I do that, I can never take it back, she said quietly. Everyone will know. My face, my name. What if it makes him worse? Lily didn't answer right away. I don't know, she admitted. But at least then he can't hide. People will be watching him, too. Emily thought about it. The idea of exposing him, of making sure everyone knew what he really was tempting, but it also terrified her. I need to think, she finally said. Lily didn't push. Okay, but don't take too long. Please. They hung up, and Emily sat in silence. Then she noticed something. A sound. A soft click. Her blood ran cold. She turned her head slowly toward the front door. The lock. Her breath caught. The deadbolt had been unlocked. She knew she locked it. She knew. She stayed perfectly still, listening. Nothing. Was she imagining things? Was the fear messing with her head? She stood up carefully, heart pounding, and reached for the nearest object. A heavy lamp from the side table. She stepped toward the door, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Then, a shadow moved on the crack of the door. Someone was outside. Emily's grip tightened around the lamp. She swallowed hard, her entire body screaming at her to run. Then a knock. Gentle, almost playful. She couldn't breathe. Another knock. Then, Emily! A voice called softly. Her stomach turned to ice. James. She felt like she was drowning. He shouldn't be here. He wasn't allowed to be here. Another knock. Then the door handle turned. It didn't open. She had locked the knob, but that didn't stop him from trying. Come on, James murmured. I know you're in there. Her hands shook. She needed to do something. She couldn't freeze now. She moved as quietly as she could, backing away from the door. If she could make it to the kitchen, she could grab a knife. Or the back door. Maybe she could run. But then he laughed. A quiet, amused sound. You think I can't get in? He asked. Emily's breath hitched. She ran. She sprinted toward the kitchen. But before she could reach it, there was a crash. The sound of glass shattering. She screamed. No time to think. No time to hesitate. She grabbed her phone and ran toward the back door. But before she could reach it, a hand grabbed her wrist. Emily. James breathed. She screamed again, struggling, twisting, kicking. But he was stronger. You didn't have to make this so difficult, he said. His grip tightened. Her heart pounded wildly. Then sirens. Loud. Close. James stiffened. Emily took her chance. She threw her entire weight forward, catching him off guard, and yanked herself free. She stumbled back, gasping. The sirens got louder. Red and blue lights flashed outside. James's expression shifted. For the first time, he looked afraid. He turned, bolting toward the broken window. He climbed through just as the front door burst open. Officers swarmed in. Emily collapsed to the floor, shaking, gasping for breath. She was safe. For now.